There comes a moment when the queen stops explaining herself, not because she's wounded, not because she's angry, but because nothing is missing anymore. This moment is often misunderstood. From the outside, it looks like detachment, coldness, loss of interest. People say she changed, but what actually changed is something far quieter. She stopped leaking her energy into places where it was never received. She stopped negotiating her worth through reaction. She stopped feeding systems that survived on her emotional availability. Carl Jung never described awakening as becoming radiant or joyful. He described it as withdrawal, the withdrawal of projections, the withdrawal of false obligation, the withdrawal of the persona that once kept the psyche safe. The queen does not withdraw her energy because she no longer cares. She withdraws it because caring used to cost her herself. In earlier stages of life, she learned that attention bought safety, that emotional labor bought belonging. That being understood felt like survival, so she explained, she reassured, she adjusted, she gave, until one day she noticed something subtle. The more she gave, the less present she felt. The more she explained, the less she was heard. The more she reacted, the more she disappeared. That realization is not dramatic. It's quiet. And once it happens, there is no return. This is not bitterness. This is not superiority. This is individuation. Jung called it the moment the ego steps aside and the self becomes the center. Not louder, not brighter, just unmoved. When the queen withdraws her energy, she is not punishing the world. She is no longer feeding what no longer feeds her. This unsettles people. Those who relied on her emotional presence feel the absence immediately. Those who depended on her reactions feel ignored. Those who benefited from her self-doubt feel exposed. And so they say she became distant. But distance is not what happened. Completion is. This video is not about becoming untouchable. It is about understanding why, at a certain point in psychological development, withdrawal becomes integrity. Why silence replaces explanation. Why stillness replaces effort. Why the queen stops caring about being understood and begins to remain aligned. If this feels familiar, don't rush to define it. Just stay with it. If you're drawn to this kind of depth, where power is quiet and awareness replaces performance, stay with the channel. We don't chase awakening here. We recognize it. The queen does not withdraw her energy suddenly. It happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, long before anyone notices. At first, she is deeply engaged with the world. She listens carefully. She responds thoughtfully. She gives attention freely, believing that connection is built through effort, empathy, and emotional presence. This stage is not weakness, it is adaptation. The psyche learns early what keeps it safe, included, and valued, and it repeats those strategies faithfully until they no longer work. In Jungian psychology, this phase is governed by the persona. The persona is not false in a moral sense. It is functional. It is the part of the psyche shaped to meet the expectations of the environment. The queen once wore her persona well. She was capable, emotionally intelligent, responsive. She understood moods before they were spoken. She sensed tension before it surfaced. This sensitivity made her effective, admired, and often relied upon. But sensitivity, when unprotected, becomes depletion. The early queen learns that her energy has value because of how others respond to it. When she gives attention, she is needed. When she explains herself, she is understood. When she adjusts, harmony is restored. These feedback loops reinforce the belief that presence must be earned through emotional contribution. Jung would describe this as identification with the persona. The ego mistakes adaptation for identity. Over time, the line between who she is and what she provides becomes blurred. The cost of this identification is subtle. She begins to feel responsible for the emotional climate around her. If others are uncomfortable, she feels compelled to smooth it. If conflict arises, she mediates. If misunderstanding appears, she clarifies. This responsiveness feels like care, but it slowly erodes her center. Her energy flows outward constantly, responding, managing, maintaining. There is little left for stillness, little space to simply be. At some point, fatigue sets in. Not physical tiredness, but existential exhaustion. She notices that no matter how much she gives, the demand does not decrease. In fact, it grows. People come to expect her availability. Her emotional labor becomes invisible. When she pauses, it is noticed immediately. When she withdraws slightly, it is questioned. This is the first signal that her energy has become currency rather than presence. Jung emphasized that individuation often begins with disillusionment. The structures that once provided meaning reveal their limitations. For the Queen, this disillusionment is quiet. It arrives as a realization that constant engagement does not create depth. That explanation does not guarantee understanding. That effort does not ensure reciprocity. This realization is not bitter. It is clarifying. She begins to experiment with small withdrawals. She pauses before responding. She allows silence to exist. She does not immediately correct misunderstandings. These moments feel uncomfortable at first. The persona resists because it fears loss of connection. But something unexpected happens. In the silence, she feels herself return. Her body relaxes. Her breath deepens. She notices how much energy was being spent maintaining an image rather than inhabiting a self. This is the beginning of energy withdrawal, but it is not yet conscious. It is guided by the nervous system seeking balance. The Queen is not rejecting others. She is responding to an internal signal that says enough. Jung would say the self is beginning to assert itself, gently but firmly, drawing energy away from the persona toward the center. Others may react during this phase. They sense the shift before they understand it. Conversations feel different. Her responses are slower, more deliberate. She no longer fills every gap. This can create unease. People accustomed to her emotional availability may interpret the change as distance. They may push for reassurance or explanation. The old pattern tempts her to comply. Sometimes she does. Sometimes she doesn't. Each time she resists the impulse to overextend, she strengthens an internal boundary. This boundary is not defensive. It is orienting. It tells her where she ends and others begin. For the first time, her energy is not automatically directed outward. It circulates inward, stabilizing her sense of self. This is a critical shift. Without it, individuation cannot proceed. Jung noted that withdrawal of projection is essential for psychological maturity. The Queen begins to see that much of what she was responding to belonged to others, their expectations, their discomfort, their unmet needs. By constantly engaging, she was carrying what was not hers. As she withdraws energy, these projections fall back to their source. This can feel abrupt to those receiving them, but it is necessary for differentiation. This stage is often misinterpreted as selfishness, but selfishness seeks gain. The Queen seeks alignment. She is not hoarding energy, she is reclaiming it. The difference is subtle but profound. Reclaimed energy does not inflate the ego. It grounds it. The Queen feels less reactive, not more powerful. Less urgent, not more important. Internally, a quiet confidence begins to form. Not confidence in outcomes or control, but confidence in her own center. She no longer needs to prove presence through effort. Presence becomes inherent. This is deeply stabilizing. It marks the transition from adaptation to individuation, from persona-led engagement to self-led orientation. Chapter 1 ends here, at the threshold. The Queen has not yet fully withdrawn. She is still learning, still shedding habits. still facing the discomfort of being less available. But the direction is set. Energy is no longer leaking outward unconsciously. It is returning home. This return is the foundation for everything that follows. As the Queen's energy begins to return inward, the external world reacts. This reaction is not dramatic, but it is revealing. Systems that relied on her responsiveness feel destabilized. People accustomed to immediate emotional access feel uncertain. The absence of automatic engagement exposes unspoken dependencies. What once flowed effortlessly now meets stillness. This is often the most uncomfortable phase, because withdrawal is mistaken for rejection, and silence is interpreted as judgment. In Jungian terms, this stage involves the collapse of projections. Others had projected roles onto the Queen: caretaker, mediator, emotional stabilizer, mirror. As long as she accepted these roles, the projections remained intact. When she withdraws energy, the projections lose their anchor. They fall back onto those who cast them. This creates discomfort, confusion, and sometimes resentment. The Queen becomes a screen onto which others project narratives to make sense of the shift. She may be called distant, changed, cold. These labels are defenses. They protect others from confronting their own reliance on her emotional labor. Jung noted that when projections are withdrawn, relationships often enter a crisis. The bond must either transform into something more conscious or dissolve entirely. The Queen does not force either outcome. She allows the process to unfold. Internally, this period is marked by heightened awareness. Without constant outward engagement, the Queen becomes acutely attuned to her inner state. She notices subtle impulses to explain, reassure, or soften discomfort. Each impulse carries a familiar emotional charge. Acting on it would restore the old balance temporarily. Resisting it creates space. This space is where individuation deepens. The Queen begins to differentiate between empathy and responsibility. She can understand others' feelings without absorbing them. This distinction is crucial. Previously, empathy flowed directly into action. Now it pauses. She listens without fixing. She witnesses without managing. This can feel unnatural at first. The ego, long trained to equate usefulness with worth, searches for justification. The Queen learns to remain still, even when the impulse to act is strong. Jung described this phase as a confrontation with the shadow, not in its dark form, but in its neglected aspects. The Queen meets parts of herself that were suppressed to maintain harmony: assertiveness, refusal, neutrality. These qualities were once judged as selfish or dangerous. Now they reveal themselves as necessary. Integrating them does not make her harsher. It makes her whole. Externally, dynamics shift. Conversations change rhythm. The Queen no longer fills silences. She allows others to sit with their own thoughts. This can feel exposing. Some respond by withdrawing, others by escalating emotionally. The Queen observes these reactions without judgment. Observation replaces intervention. This is not detachment. It is clarity. This clarity reveals patterns that were previously invisible. She sees how often urgency was manufactured to secure her attention, how vulnerability was sometimes exaggerated to elicit care, how conflict was used to provoke engagement. None of this is malicious. It is human. But once seen, it cannot be unseen. The Queen does not confront these patterns directly. She simply stops responding to them. Without reinforcement, they lose power. A subtle grief may arise during this stage. The Queen realizes that some connections were sustained primarily through her effort. Letting them fade feels like loss, even when the loss is necessary. Jung acknowledged that individuation often requires sacrifice, not of values, but of illusions. The illusion here is that constant availability equals love. Releasing this belief frees energy, but it also closes certain doors. The queen learns to tolerate misinterpretation. This is one of the most difficult skills to acquire. The ego wants to correct the record, to restore the image of care and warmth. But correction would require re-entering the old pattern. Silence, in this context, is not avoidance. It is fidelity to the self. Over time, the need to be understood diminishes. Understanding oneself becomes sufficient. As energy stabilizes internally, the queen's presence changes quality. It becomes slower, denser, more grounded. She speaks less, but when she does, her words carry weight. This is not because she is trying to be impactful. It is because her speech is no longer diluted by over-explanation. Each expression emerges from alignment rather than urgency. Others may feel this shift viscerally, even if they cannot articulate it. This phase also tests patience. Individuation does not provide immediate rewards. There is no applause for restraint, no validation for silence. The queen must trust an internal compass that is still forming. Jung emphasized that the self communicates through subtle signals, not dramatic signs. Dreams, bodily sensations, and quiet intuitions guide the process. The queen learns to listen. Gradually, relationships reorganize. Some dissolve quietly. Others deepen unexpectedly. Those capable of meeting her without projection remain. These connections feel different. There is less intensity, but more authenticity. Less drama, but more presence. The queen does not seek these outcomes. They emerge naturally from her changed orientation. By the end of this chapter, the queen is no longer defined by her reactions. She has not fully arrived, but she is no longer lost. Energy flows inward by default. Engagement becomes choice rather than compulsion. This is the midpoint of awakening. The persona has loosened its grip. The self has not yet fully taken the throne, but its influence is unmistakable. The queen stands in transition, steady, observant, and increasingly free. By the time the queen reaches this stage, withdrawal is no longer an experiment. It has become a way of being. Energy no longer rushes outward in response to every emotional signal. It settles. It gathers. It remains available, but not accessible by demand. This is where the true misunderstanding begins, because from the outside, restraint looks like indifference. From the inside, it feels like coherence. The queen now recognizes that not all engagement is connection. Much of what once passed for intimacy was actually regulation. People sought her presence to stabilize their own inner states. When she offered calm, they borrowed it. When she offered clarity, they leaned on it. When she offered emotional labor, they rested inside it. This exchange was never consciously negotiated, yet it shaped many relationships. Awareness changes this dynamic irreversibly. Jung spoke of the danger of inflation during individuation, the temptation to identify with the power that emerges when projections are withdrawn. The queen avoids this not through humility, but through grounding. She does not feel superior. She feels complete. Completion has a different texture. It is quieter, less reactive, less concerned with comparison. Inflation requires an audience. Completion does not. As her energy stabilizes, the queen becomes more selective, not as a strategy, but as a consequence. Certain environments feel draining without needing explanation. Certain conversations feel misaligned before words are exchanged. Her nervous system responds before cognition does. This sensitivity is no longer overwhelming because it is contained. She trusts it. Trust reduces noise. This trust allows her to remain present in situations that once demanded performance. She can sit in silence without discomfort. She can listen without preparing a response. She can witness emotion without absorbing it. These capacities change the emotional economy of every interaction. Others may feel exposed because their usual cues no longer work. The queen does not intend this effect. She simply no longer compensates. Compensation was the hidden cost of caring too much. It required constant adjustment, self-monitoring, and emotional translation. Now, caring is quieter. It does not rush to soothe. It does not seek to resolve immediately. It allows experience to unfold. This can feel unsettling to those accustomed to quick emotional exchange. But it also invites maturity. Some rise to meet it. Others retreat. The Queen notices that her silence often elicits more honesty than her questions ever did. Without prompts, people reveal themselves. They fill the space with their own narratives. The Queen listens without attachment. She is not collecting information to act on. She is simply observing. Observation without agenda is a form of power that does not dominate. It clarifies. At this stage, the Queen no longer explains her boundaries. Explanation would imply negotiation. Her boundaries are lived, not defended. This does not make her rigid. It makes her consistent. Consistency builds trust, even when it frustrates. People know where she stands, even if they do not like it. Predictability replaces accommodation. Internally, the ego has softened. It no longer panics when misunderstood. It no longer seeks validation through usefulness. The Queen experiences a deeper alignment between thought, feeling, and action. Jung described this alignment as the emergence of the self, as the organizing principle of the psyche. Decisions arise from integration rather than conflict. There is less inner debate, more quiet certainty. This certainty is not intellectual. It is embodied. The Queen feels it as groundedness. Her posture changes subtly. Her movements slow. Her voice carries less urgency. These changes are not performed. They happen naturally when the nervous system no longer anticipates threat. Safety has been internalized. External systems respond to this embodiment. Some people attempt to provoke reaction, testing whether the old patterns still exist. They may escalate emotion, introduce drama, or question her motives. The Queen does not engage, not out of spite, but because engagement would pull her out of alignment. Over time, these attempts lose momentum. Without fuel, they dissipate. Other people respond differently. They relax. They feel permission to be less performative themselves. The Queen's presence becomes regulating rather than demanding. This is the paradox of withdrawal. By pulling energy inward, she creates space outward. Space allows authenticity to emerge. Not everyone wants this, but those who do find it rare. The Queen's relationship to caring transforms fundamentally. Caring is no longer measured by output. It is measured by integrity. She cares by remaining whole, by not abandoning herself to manage others, by staying present without overextension. This form of care is less visible, but more sustainable. Jung warned that individuation can isolate those who undergo it, not because they withdraw from humanity, but because they no longer participate in collective illusions. The Queen accepts this solitude without resentment. She does not romanticize it. She simply recognizes it as a phase. Solitude becomes a companion rather than a wound. As this chapter closes, the Queen stands firmly within herself. Energy is no longer something she gives away unconsciously. It is something she inhabits. She engages when aligned. She withdraws when necessary. Neither action defines her. What defines her is the center she no longer abandons. This is the threshold before the final stage. The Queen has withdrawn her energy from the world's demands. What remains is the question of what she will do with the power of containment she has reclaimed. In the final stage, the Queen no longer experiences withdrawal as an action. It is no longer something she does. It is something that has already happened. Energy is no longer divided between inner truth and outer demand. There is no tension between engagement and restraint. The psyche has reorganized itself around a stable center. Jung would call this the emergence of the self as sovereign. This sovereignty does not announce itself. It does not seek recognition. It does not require confirmation. The queen does not feel finished in a triumphant sense. She feels settled. The endless movement outward has stopped. What remains is presence without urgency, attention without hunger, care without self-erasure. At this stage, the queen understands something fundamental. Most suffering was not caused by others, but by unconscious participation in systems that required her fragmentation. She was not trapped by people. She was trapped by identification. Identification with being needed, being valued, being understood. Individuation dissolved these identifications quietly, one by one. The world does not look dramatically different. People still behave as they always have. Systems still operate on speed, noise, and reaction. What has changed is her relationship to them. She no longer takes the bait. She no longer internalizes chaos. She no longer interprets others' discomfort as her responsibility. This freedom is subtle, but total. Jung emphasized that the final stage of individuation is not perfection, but wholeness. The queen still feels emotion. She still experiences sadness, joy, frustration, and care. The difference is that these emotions pass through her rather than define her. They do not dictate action. They inform awareness. This distinction creates profound stability. Others may sense this stability and feel unsettled, not because the queen is threatening, but because she is no longer adjustable. She cannot be guilted into overextension. She cannot be rushed into reaction. She cannot be flattered into compliance. This does not make her rigid. It makes her free. The queen now understands the true meaning of power. Power is not influence over others. It is freedom from unconscious influence. It is the ability to remain oneself in the presence of expectation, pressure, and projection. This power does not need defense. It is maintained through alignment alone. At this stage, silence becomes natural, not as avoidance, but as completion. The queen no longer feels compelled to share every insight or justify every choice. Explanation once served to secure belonging. Belonging is now internal. She belongs to herself. This belonging cannot be revoked. Relationships that remain at this stage are different. They are not built on need or exchange. They are built on resonance. Conversation flows without effort. Silence is not awkward. There is space for difference without threat. These relationships are fewer, but they are real. The queen does not mourn what is lost. She honors what is true. There is a quiet grief that accompanies this stage. Not grief for people, but for the version of herself that worked so hard to be acceptable. She recognizes the innocence of that effort, the necessity of it, and she releases it without judgment. Compassion replaces self-criticism. This compassion extends inward first, then outward. The queen no longer seeks awakening. Seeking implies lack. She lives awareness. Awareness of her limits. Awareness of her needs. Awareness of her capacity to engage and disengage. This awareness is steady. It does not fluctuate with mood or circumstance. Jung would describe this as psychological maturity, the end of the heroic journey. Importantly, the queen does not withdraw from life. She participates fully, but selectively. She chooses where her energy flows. Choice replaces compulsion. This is the final liberation. Not escape from the world, but freedom within it. Others may still misunderstand her. They may project coldness, arrogance, or detachment. The queen does not correct them. Correction would imply dependence on their perception. She allows misunderstanding to exist. This allowance is not indifference. It is respect for others' autonomy. Everyone must interpret from their own level of awareness. The queen's presence now has a grounding effect. Without trying, she slows environments down. Her calm invites reflection. Her steadiness interrupts reactivity. She does not teach. She does not preach. She simply is. Jung believed that the individuated person serves the collective not through instruction, but through example. This is why the Queen's withdrawal is the final stage of awakening. There is nothing left to grasp, nothing left to prove, nothing left to protect through performance. The psyche rests in itself. Energy circulates inward and outward naturally, without loss. The Queen has not become above others. She has become anchored. Anchoring creates depth. Depth creates gravity. Gravity does not chase. It draws what resonates and lets the rest pass. In this final stage, the Queen understands that caring never disappeared. It transformed. Caring is no longer an act of self-sacrifice. It is an expression of alignment. She cares by staying whole, by not abandoning her center, by refusing to fragment for acceptance. This is the quiet ending. No climax, no declaration, just a stable presence moving through the world without leaking itself into it. The Queen does not rule. She does not withdraw in isolation. She inhabits her life fully, without apology. And that is the final stage. If something settled while you listened, don't rush to name it. Let it live with you for a while. Notice what you no longer feel pulled to explain. Notice where your energy stays, without effort. If you want to continue refining this kind of clarity, without noise, without performance, stay here. Quiet power isn't something you claim. It's something you stop giving away.